All right, before we take a look at what we're going to talk about today, which is Madison term and beginnings of the War of 1812, let's go over a little bit about your exam. Okay, you'll go to the modules. You guys will see that if you scroll down, come on. Yeah, slow. Come on. There we go. All right, you will see a module about, if this ever loads, with our exam stuff in it. Okay, study guide is there. Okay, this first part is the multiple choice. Okay, and notice that is due on Friday. Okay, this part is timed, so once you get into it, okay, you have to finish it. So just like we did the last time. Okay, so make sure that when you sit down to do it, you're ready to do it, and that you're somewhere that the internet is good. Okay, if you don't trust your internet in your dorm or at home, go to the media center, whatever. Okay, but make sure you're ready to go. Okay, so that's the multiple choice. Okay, and then the writing part. Okay, is right here. Okay, and I'm going to show you what I want you guys to do. Okay, if you click on the IDs and the essays, notice that's due on the 19th. That's due a couple of days later. I'm giving you a little bit of time to do this. Okay. So I put 10 identifiers on here, and there they are. Okay. And you pick 6. Okay. Now, like we said last time, make sure that you identify these items. Okay. Who, what, when, where, why, historical significance. Okay. So you have to make sure that you completely identify whatever it is. And a sentence usually is not going to do it. Okay, they're too big and they're too important. Then the essays are on here, and I tell you to pick 3. Okay, what I want you to do, what I'd like for you to do, is put it all into one Word document. Okay, so you can type on it, save it just like you would a paper. Write out your 6 IDs, write out your 3 essays, put them all in one Word document, and then just upload that document. Okay? I'll figure out the rest. Okay? Just make sure you get it all in one document and put it up there. So when you turn that in, you should have 6 IDs and 3 essays. Okay? You can pick any of the 3 essays. Okay? You can pick 6 of these. Okay? And turn that in. So that's the writing part. Okay, make sure you don't plagiarize. Okay, and make sure that what you submit is your own work, and make sure that you have that uploaded by the due date. Okay, all right. Don't forget though, multiple choice. Okay, that part is timed, so be ready to go when you sit down with that. Okay, all right. Enough of that. All right, we left off talking about the end of President Jefferson's administration. Jefferson chooses not to run again in 1808. He could have. There's nothing in the Constitution at that time that says he couldn't have. Some believe that he actually was entertaining running for a 3rd term, maybe to show himself better than Washington. I don't know. Show his party as being better than the Federalists. But all of the hullabaloo about the Embargo Act is that kills that, and Jefferson will choose not to run. However, his party despite the disaster of the Embargo Act, his party is still strong enough to win the election of 1808, which tells you a couple of things. It tells you, one, how weak the Federalists are, and two, it tells you that America is shifting a little bit, okay? Look at where these new states are, okay? Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio. As we begin to push west, those areas are going to be agrarian, they're going to be farmer-driven, they're going to be frontier-driven, and those people tend to support Jefferson's political party. So all of the nation's growth tends to support the Democratic Republicans and the Jeffersonian Republicans, and not the Federalists. Essentially, the Federalists have become almost landlocked, and they are about to start really dying as a political party, a slow, agonizing death. So instead of Jefferson, the choice for the Democratic Republicans was his Secretary of State, James Madison. And so in 1808, Madison wins the presidential election easily. See, he gets 70% of the electoral vote, so he wins pretty easily. Madison is Madison is well qualified for this job. Okay, he's been Secretary of State. He has been regarded as the father of the Constitution. He had brought with him the Virginia Plan, which becomes really a major part of the structure of our new government of the Constitution. So he's been Secretary of State. He has he's plenty of experience. Okay, Madison is not the most charismatic person ever. Okay, he's kind of bookish. He would rather be camped in some corner reading a book than entertaining or doing the entertaining of being president. He had gone to Princeton. He was very well educated and is just not that good at being a politician in a lot of ways. Thankfully, Madison has some assistance in this, okay? His wife, Dolly. Dolly sets the precedent. Dolly really is the example of what a first lady should be. Okay? She was a widow, had been married before her husband had died in a yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia. And in fact, she had suffered a lot of illnesses going back to that yellow fever epidemic. So she had lost her husband. She is introduced to Madison by, of all people, Aaron Burr, and they begin to court and will eventually marry. Dolly had a son previous. That son will be adopted by Madison, and they really become a very tight, very pretty close-knit family. Dolly had helped Jefferson with a lot of his social duties when her husband had been Secretary of State. Jefferson was a widower himself, and so she sort of was the fill-in kind of temporary first lady even for Jefferson. So when her husband becomes president, she has lots of experience with it, and she kind of is she runs the White House, essentially. Dolly also sort of set the example of having people from different political parties come to the White House together and dine. Now, previous to that, presidents rarely did that because they were afraid that if you brought in people from the different political parties that they would fight, you'd have a brawl on your hands or worse. And so it was very rarely done. Dolly, of course, insisted on decorum and on really people behaving themselves. She set the standard, and if you wanted to get invited back to the White House, you abided by her rules. And so her husband was able to bring people together and have them dine and have them communicate rather than breaking out into a fist fight, which is always good. A lot of debate about how you spell her name. All right, sometimes you see it like this with EY, sometimes it's just Y. People insist that on her birth certificate it's IE. Okay, so we're not exactly sure how to spell her name. She outlives her husband. She outlives Madison. After he is no longer president, he continues to serve until his death. And she outlives him, and it almost really goes, she really does, she really goes bankrupt. And the only thing that saves her really later in life was she will sell her husband's papers to Congress. So one big section of those papers that she ends up selling to the national government are Madison's notes from the Constitutional Convention. Now, those guys at the Constitutional Convention had really swore an oath that they would not discuss anything from that convention until years afterwards. And so he had kept his promise. He had these journals that he had kept about the Constitutional Convention. And we know, most of what we know about what went on at the Constitutional Convention comes from Madison's records. And so she ends up selling those to the national government in order to stay afloat after the death of her husband. Madison inherits a huge problem, okay? Madison inherits a brewing war. His presidency is going to be dominated by the outbreak of the War of 1812. Okay? Now that doesn't happen until really the end of his first term and the beginning really of his second term. Okay? But his whole presidency really is dominated by this move towards the War of 1812, the fighting of the War of 1812, and then the aftermath of the War of 1812, which we have to kind of dig through. Okay? It is not Madison's fault. Don't ever think that Madison is the one that drags us into this war. He is not. Madison resists going to war for years before he eventually has to bow to pressure to go to war. Like his predecessors before him, he realized that we were not very well prepared for war. And going to war with England, like we do, is not exactly going to be easy. When he becomes president, okay, and we start looking for causes of the War of 1812. There are several causes of the war that date back to even before Madison was president. So there's nothing really he can do about this stuff, okay? But it sets the stage. In Europe, starting in about 1805, Napoleon had gone on the offensive and had begun to take control of most of Europe. By 1808, Napoleon will be virtually in control of all of Europe in one way or another. He will be in control of Spain. He'll be in control of France. He'll be in control of Italy. He will have Germany and Austria, all right, on his side. He will force Russia to sign a treaty to be on his side. The only major European nation by 1808 that is not part of the French Empire is England. Okay? Napoleon dominates the continent. We are neutral. We claim to be neutral. We say that we're neutral. We've been neutral for a while. But remember, we need to trade. Our nation's economy and our nation's really lifeblood is trade. And so we need to be trading with both England and France, England and the European continent. But when they're at war, that puts us in the middle of a war zone. The British don't want us trading with the French don't want us trading with England, and so they both have been attacking our shipping. And that dates way back. Okay? That is why Jefferson had issued the Embargo Act in 1807. But Jefferson believed that he could pressure the rest of the world into leaving us alone as simply by withholding all of our trade. And that is an economic disaster for us. So, under Madison, that changed. We start to trade with the rest of the world, but not with England and not with France. Okay? In 1806, Napoleon issued the Berlin Decrees, which essentially becomes known as the Continental System. Napoleon was in control of the continent, and Napoleon basically tells everyone that he is in control of that they cannot trade with England. There will be no trade with England, and that they are not going to allow anyone else to trade with England. Well, as you can probably guess, England responds with the Orders in Council and says, that's great. Okay, we're not going to let anybody trade with you. Okay? And so by 1806, you have both sides that have blockaded the other. Okay? So now who are we going to trade with? Okay? The problem is that England is in a position to make our lives miserable. Okay? And between 1808 and 1811, England will seize our shipping and kidnap over 6,000 American sailors during that 3-year stretch between 1808 and 1811. Excuse me. Impressment is nothing new. Impressment has been around for a while. We've talked about it. You can go back to Jay's Treaty. When we talked about Washington and Jay's Treaty, impressment has been around for a while. But we can't do anything about it. Okay. So you look at this, both sides don't want us trading. Okay? But who is the one that can really make our lives tough? Okay? Who is it that can really hurt us? And it's the British. The British Navy is strong enough to hurt us. And so remember, Madison and his party are pro-French. Madison and his party have been pro-French since their beginning. They don't necessarily like England. And so if England is the one that is constantly harassing us and is constantly impressing our sailors, then who should we go to war with? With England. Exactly. There are members inside of Madison's party that have been, they pushed Jefferson for war, didn't get it, and they are going to begin to push Madison for war, and eventually get it. All right. When we talked about Jefferson's presidency, we talked about the Chesapeake Leopard affair. The United States warship Chesapeake in June of 1807 was fired on by the British ship Leopard right off the coast of Virginia. The Leopard killed 3 Americans, wounded 18 others, and then impressed 4 of our sailors. Now, of course, the British apologized for this, but it reeked of warfare. The Chesapeake is an American warship. We get one of our warships attacked by the British, most people start screaming for war. And they had pushed Jefferson to declare war. Jefferson's response, though, was not war. Okay? He did seem to put us on a wartime footing, But remember, Jefferson's big response was this, the Embargo Act. Okay? The Embargo Act closed off America to trade really for the rest of the world. It ruins our economy. It was hated by Americans. Okay? We even tried to do everything, including really starting a black market and smuggling goods out, trying to get around Jefferson's embargo, especially in New England, who hated it because it ruined their economy. By the time Jefferson leaves office, the embargo has been repealed and has been replaced with this, okay? The next big step, the Non-Intercourse Act. When Madison became president, what he insisted is that we are going to open back up trade to the rest of the world, but we are not going to trade with England and France, okay? So our ships start going back out, and of course, as soon as they do, the British start hounding them and start shooting at them and start boarding them and taking American sailors, okay? All right, which is going to push us even further. One of the unexpected things that happened because of this, because of what had happened during the embargo, is that New Englanders began to realize that they needed to diversify. They made their livelihoods on shipping and on commerce. What they will start to do is move towards manufacturing as well. This will eventually start America down the path towards the Industrial Revolution. And it's going to set up some parts of America as being really those areas where manufacturing and industry are going to begin, including in New England. Okay. The ironic thing about this is that Jefferson, remember, was a believer that the best America would be an agrarian America. But his policies are the ones that forced the New Englanders to diversify and embrace manufacturing, which will eventually dominate America. We don't consider ourselves to be an agricultural area anymore, do we? We're an industrial giant. And so, in some ways, Jefferson's unintended consequences of his policies, the unintended consequences of his policies, were creating an America that he didn't like. Kind of sad in some ways. All right. And eventually really driving us towards Hamilton's view of what America should be. Well, anyway, the Non-Intercourse Act puts our ships back out there, opens them back up to attack when they start getting attacked and when they start getting sailors impressed. People inside of Congress go nuts and begin to push Madison towards war. To make matters worse, this is an old one too. Impressment is old, but so is this belief that the British, in Canada especially, were instigating Native Americans to attack our settlements out west, that the British were arming the Native Americans, excuse me, and encouraging them to attack our western settlements. Were they? Yes. Okay. So this one is true. And this has been a sore point, really, ever since the end of the Revolutionary War. Best example is that guy that you see right there in the picture, Tecumseh. Tecumseh is a native warrior from the Ohio, Indiana area. Tecumseh and his brother had begun to really form a Native American confederacy. Tecumseh had started to encourage Native Americans in this region to, instead of giving up their land, to fight. And Tecumseh's confederation was, in a lot of ways, the last real major attempt to stop westward expansion during this time period. In Indiana, in modern-day Indiana, the territorial governor of Indiana in 1811 was that guy, William Henry Harrison, who will eventually become president. William Henry Harrison was a territorial governor of Indiana. Now, he felt like he had successfully negotiated a treaty with many of the Native Americans in Indiana, had asked them to come together at Fort Wayne to sign away their land. In exchange, we were compensating them for the land that they were exchanging with us. Harrison was pretty confident that Native Americans were going to really do this and then move west. But instead, Tecumseh had organized this confederacy, encouraging the Native Americans, instead of giving up their land, to fight for their homeland. Okay? And they began to attack settlements in western Indiana, forcing Harrison to raise an army and to go out and to make war on Tecumseh and his brother. Now, the major battle was fought at a place called Tippecanoe. The Battle of Tippecanoe was decisive. Harrison wins. Okay? He will drive the Native Americans really back into Canada as a result. Tecumseh and many of the Native Americans who had joined this confederation will actually end up pulling back into Canada. It made Harrison a national hero, and in 1840, when he runs for president, he will, those people that embrace him for president will come up with one of the most famous presidential slogans of all time, Tippecanoe and Tyler too, because John Tyler was his vice president. So the Battle of Tippecanoe is a big deal, okay? But looking back on it, we look at this, okay, and people say, wait a minute, where did these guys get the weapons? Where did these guys get the idea to attack us? It's the British. So, inside of Congress, there are a whole group of young Western congressmen. Not just Western, but especially young congressmen, people new to Congress who are Democratic Republicans. They are going to begin to become very vocal, trying to get Madison to declare war. Henry Clay from Kentucky, one of the most famous. Clay will eventually, he will have a stellar career in Congress. He'll be a congressman. He'll be Speaker of the House of Representatives. He'll run for president several times, all unsuccessfully. Others include John C. Calhoun from South Carolina, who will also have a stellar career in Congress and the Senate, will at one time be the Vice President of the United States, but will have a falling out with Andrew Jackson, will return to South Carolina, become a senator from South Carolina, and become a devoted champion for states' rights and slavery. We'll follow Calhoun pretty carefully. But it's my argument that Calhoun has the best hair in Congress for many years. Okay, you got to admit that's a pretty impressive shock of hair right there. Okay, all right. Madison wins the election of 1812 fairly easily. But if you'll notice something, okay, notice how the Federalists have rebounded a little bit, okay? If you go all the way, I'm going to go all the way back for a second because it's important to kind of remember this. I need to copy this map and stick it over here. That brown area is the only places that the Federalists got any kind of support in 1808. I see that? I kind of remember that. Okay. When you get to this election, it changes pretty dramatically. Oops. And notice how they won New York, for example. Okay. The Federalists win New York. Almost all of New England, but they also get New Jersey, Delaware, and parts of Maryland. Okay, so a little bit of a rebound. It shows you how unpopular some of Madison's policies have become. It also shows you that we're on the verge of something. Okay. Madison feels like he has very little choice. He is being pushed and pushed and pushed, and he will eventually issue a declaration of war. He will ask Congress for a declaration of war and get it because his party has been pushing him for war, and they, of course, are going to ratify that. The War of 1812 is not a very popular war. New Englanders hate it because they're pro-British. Federalists, remember, are pro-British. So they hate it. They blame Madison for everything that goes wrong. They do not cooperate. Many of the Federalist states will not cooperate in the war effort. New York, for example, won't allow its militia to leave its state boundaries. Okay? So we don't have much of a national army in 1812. So we needed state militias to help kind of move in. And if they aren't going to cooperate, that severely limits our ability to fight this war. So we are divided about it. We don't like it. We are way under-prepared for this war, okay? We could put about 12 major warships into the water. Now, we have plenty of other ships, especially very small ones, especially on the Great Lakes. But we do not have anything compared to the British Navy, okay? We have disorganized state militias that have been a problem ever since the Revolutionary War. They are poorly trained, poorly equipped, in most cases poorly led, all right, and they are a disaster waiting to happen. Oh, and trust me, I'll give you an example of that later on. We're not prepared financially. As we cut off trade and then as we start to move to war, we're going to lose trade, for example, with England. That's going to cut into our ability to pay for a war. There are regional disagreements between New England and the rest of the states over fighting this war. So, do not think. We tend to think sometimes that anytime America goes to war, that everybody's in favor of it, and of course that's not usually the case. And the War of 1812 is no different. Okay. The War of 1812 is a disaster waiting to happen. The war is fought in about 3 to 4 different stages. Okay. The first thing the British do is use their navy. You guys can see this line right out here. They will use their navy to blockade us. So not only are we not going to be able to trade with the British, we're not going to be able to trade with anybody because the British blockade is very effective. And that hurts us economically. In any war that we have fought up to this point, whether it be the colonial wars like King William's War, King George's War, Queen Anne's War, French and Indian War. Anytime war broke out, one of the things that we thought we should do was to attack Canada. And this will be no different. Okay? When the War of 1812 breaks out, some of the first fighting is going to be up here along the Great Lakes and in this area between us and the border of Canada. It does not take us very long to find out how unprepared we are for this war, okay? Because we are not going to do very well up there, okay? So we try to push up into these areas using Fort Detroit, Fort Niagara. Then we're going to try to push up towards Montreal, and that is going to be a disaster, okay? As you guys will find out. Later, the British are going to attack us. Back to the map. By pushing into the Chesapeake and attacking our coastal forts in Maryland, Virginia, those areas along the Chesapeake, towards Baltimore, and then eventually invading the nation's capital. Well, of course, we will fight gallantly to defend our nation's capital, right? No. We get pushed out of the Capitol. The British burn the Capitol, burn the White House. Okay? And then, believe it or not, for some silly reason, the war ends. The war ends in 1814, in December of 1814. But before word can get out, the third major place and the third major battle takes place down here in the Gulf as the British invade New Orleans and we defend it. After the war is over, nobody bothered to tell these guys. Okay? They're like you guys. They never check their email. Okay? So they fight the Battle of New Orleans really after the war is over. Okay? War of 1812, though, has some pretty big consequences, and I'm going to talk about those, and I'm going to go through a little bit of the war effort in our lecture for Friday. Okay? All right. That's it for today. Remember, make sure you get in there and start working on your test stuff, okay, and get that stuff done, okay, and we will, on Friday, pick up, finish the War of 1812, okay, and then next week we will be doing the Era of Good Feelings, Monroe's administration, stuff like that, so we'll be kind of moving on ahead next week. All right, see you guys. Stay safe.